Hey everybody, KC here. So today we have part two of my conversation with former PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi. The whole thing ran during the Western Michigan University annual food marketing conference this week. This is part two. We've broken it up into smaller pieces for Morning Newsbeat. And we talk about a number of different things, including specific words of advice for both women and men entering the workforce. So I hope you enjoyed part two of my conversation with Indra Nooyi. We have a question, not a surprising question, but one that is, I know, on the mind of a lot of the students. Three of them who asked it were Abby Herman, Shana Krozik, and Madison Woods. And question is, are there specific words of advice that you would give to women entering the business world and especially the CPG world?
First of all, I tell you, the CPG world is just a fantastic industry to be in. And so women or men, I would say, if you want to learn solid disciplines on marketing, manufacturing, R&D, finance, the CPG industry is big, complex, transaction intensive. You will learn a lot. So think of the CPG industry as a great destination. Now, let me also say that the next decades are the decades for women, because women represent 70% of the valedictorians in high school. They're getting more college degrees than ever before. In fact, 10 points more than the men. They're getting more professional degrees. And in a world where there's a talent shortage, no longer can people say they're going to discriminate against women. They're going to look at the talent pool in its entirety and draw from it. So I think that it's a great time for women to come into the workforce and stay in the workforce because companies need them. Finally, in CPG, if the employee base should reflect the consumer base, a lot of the decisions in especially food and beverage are made by women. So, if you really want your consumer base to be reflected in your employee base, companies should want to hire more women. So it's a good time. What would I recommend? Consider the CPG industry as a destination. But once you get in there, learn the business ground up. Learn everything from the route salesman to manufacturing to procurement to R&D to distribution. Learn everything about the business ground up. Put your hand up for the toughest assignments. Nobody remembers you because you did the easy work. Put your hand up for the toughest assignments. Put the company before you and understand the politics in the company, but do not play the politics. People do not like people who, gossip and play the politics. And believe me, if you did that, I don't see why you cannot rise in the company. And then, it's up to you what you want to do after that.
So let me follow that up. If the next 2 decades are going to be the decades of women, especially in the business world, then what advice would you give to men?
Men have always had a bit of an edge in all of these industries. The good
I'm not
news
suggesting you should feel sorry for men. I'm just
no, I don't feel not a bit. Remember, every one of my mentors were men, so I'm deeply, deeply, deeply grateful to them. I think that we're entering a phase, Kevin, where we're going to have more jobs than people, and I think that this is a time for both men and women. But here's the underlying, what I would underline: people with talent, people with qualifications should have a job easily. If you don't have the ability to be a lifelong learner, if you don't have the core skills to function in a company, you are going to fall behind and you have to be reskilled. So I say this to men and women. And that's why I started with valedictorians and college degrees. Stay in school, stay in college, get whatever degree you need to, because the world is a knowledge world. You're going to have to reskill yourself. And I say to the men who are dropping out, please don't, please go back to school or whatever vocational training. Be armed with the skill. That's what the world needs.
Are there things that you think American business underinvests in, just in terms of initiatives? And then I guess the opposite side of that question is, are there things that you think business overinvests in or over-indexes in terms of importance?
Here is a dilemma. I think for us to have a robust supply chain in the country for all the critical things we need for the country requires a long-term industrial plan for the country, which says these are the strategic industries, we're going to invest in it, we're going to keep it here. We're going to provide government help to make sure they never get offshored. but these industries cannot leave the country because they're critical, okay? But that requires an industrial plan from the country, which we've never had. And so, you get into this dilemma. For example, the recent supply chain crisis, it was not the government's doing, it was private sector's doing. Yet when the problem happened, we blamed it on the government. But if government intervenes and decides to do an industrial plan, we'll say, oh, that's not the role of government. That's the role of private industry. So we have to decide where we come out on these issues. But if you really want to strategically architect the country's supply chain, we have to decide what industries are critical and hold on to them for dear life. I mean, semiconductor manufacturing should never have left the shores of the country. Semiconductor manufacturing equipment companies were all in the US. They left the shores of the US, and now we are worried about semiconductor shortages. They should never have left the country. But those required a government intervention to say, I don't care if you're going to lower the cost by 5% going to some other country, we need it in the US. So they will remain here. But that requires an architecture for what we want as critical industries. So this gets into this balance between capitalism and a defined industrial plan that supports capitalism rather than, say, capitalism not in spite of capitalism without any shape or definition by the government, which is where we are today.
Yeah, I think sometimes the words public policy have a dirty sound to them to some people, but nuanced, intelligent public policy is really good for businesses and for capitalism.
And I think as businesses, we should stop blaming government in tough times and taking all the credit in good times. Because today's supply chain crisis is our doing. I mean, I would say our private industry. We didn't do demand planning right. We didn't, forecast what we needed earlier. And we didn't anticipate the bounce back from COVID. Why are we blaming government? So
we had a number of people who asked the same question, which is, as you look back at your career, is there a best moment? Is there a big accomplishment then that you would point to and say, yeah, that was the one? And then because I'm a troublemaker, then I want to follow that up with what's the biggest mistake you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Believe it or not, the biggest aha moment is when we bought Quaker Oats. Remember that whole thing about it was going to go to the other company, and then they turned it down and came to us. That was a big moment for us.
I love that.
Yeah. It was a big moment for us because, we got Quaker, the brand for the morning occasion, and then we got Gatorade, two great brands that came into the PepsiCo stable of brands. And given all the stuff we went through in that whole negotiation process, when it actually came to us and we announced it, and the five of us stood on the stage and announced it, it felt fantastic, Kevin. That was a high moment. Now let's talk about something that I wish I'd had more courage and stuck by. I think during the financial crisis, when we were all hurting as a country, there was a suggestion made by our marketing team that we take some of our Super Bowl dollars and put it against a marketing campaign they call Pepsi Refresh. And that is taking, a portion of the marketing dollars that we put on Super Bowl and giving it away into micro grants, which are crowdsourced from across the world and across the country and voted by people to decide who should get the grants so that communities can actually benefit through this crisis. And I still remember giving out the first check to a group of kids who had Down syndrome who wanted to be cheerleaders, but nobody would coach them. The first check I gave out was, I think, $5,000 for them to get a coach to coach them to be cheerleaders. I felt great about it. And there were programs like that, phenomenal programs, all micro grants. People wrote saying, this is not Pepsi, this goes against the brand, and you're going to lose share if this continues. And, there was quite a lot of criticism about the Pepsi Refresh project, as it was called. A year later, I backed off of it, not because we lost share, but I couldn't take the criticism. And you know what? I felt terrible about it. Because at the end of the day, those communities that benefited from those grants, we made a profound difference. And God, if we took some a few million dollars off of the Super Bowl, I'm not sure it made a huge difference to the brands. But I backed off of that. And Kevin, I went back to school on that for months to figure out what is it about my decision-making and our communication style that caused the criticism in the first place and that I backed off in the second place. I think every failure is a learning moment. You've got to go to school on that.
Well, the amazing thing is that, and you're talking the financial crisis, so we're talking 2008, 2009. But if you flash forward 10 or 15 years, and those kinds of programs have become much more, I mean, you were really early to the game thinking in those terms. Now, companies that do that are routinely
lauded.
Yes, that I mean, that's really interesting. So, I mean, you're still young. You're younger than I am. Do you have a great accomplishment? Do you have something are you done being a CEO? But do you have an accomplishment that you're aiming at this point?
I'm done being a CEO. I mean, I did it for 12 years. I want to help develop the next generation of CEOs.
Okay, I want to stop you real quickly though. So if Starbucks calls you tomorrow and says, "Oh, listen, Howard's only going to do this on an interim basis. We'd like you to come run the company," you're going to say no?
Absolutely no.
Okay. Now I want to I now have you on the record.
No, I'm focused much more on, well, how can I give back to society? How can I work on the whole childcare issue to see how we can help young family builders with childcare? What can I do to help mentor and advise the next generation of leaders? And many people I knew in PepsiCo have gone off to start companies. How can I advise them and help them grow their companies? I teach up at the Military Academy in West Point. It's something that's very, very fulfilling. How can I do that? The boards I'm on, I want to contribute and I want to learn from them. And I want to spend time with my family, a luxury I never had in my early days. And so my life is very, very full at this point. And I think that I love it. I love what I have right now, Kevin. I'm busy, but my kind of busy, learning so much and loving every moment of it. But going back to active CEOship
So, I mean, you describe in the book the whole notion of figuring out how to do both childcare, help families with childcare and elder care, right?
Yeah.
Because very often people who are in the prime of at the point in their careers where they are leaders within companies, they're taking care of kids and taking care of their parents.
You bet.
Sometimes.
The sandwich generation, yeah.
You describe that as being kind of a moonshot, that it's something, and again, you sort of describe that that is something that companies have to approach, but also that there needs to be a broader and societal reckoning if we're going to keep people keep people in the workforce who are vital to the workforce, but also have these other responsibilities.
I'm very, very worried about the looming care crisis. We talk about the Great Resignation. If you dig deep into it, a lot of people are quitting the job of caregivers, nurses, child caregivers, aging caregivers. The stress on them is way too much, and their wages are so low. And we have an aging population. If we don't have people who stay in caregiving, who's going to take care of the aging population? So I look at the looming care crisis coming within the next decade as something that should draw the attention of all people interested in our society and the success of society. Otherwise, we're going to have very lonely aging people, and we're going to have a lot of people leave the workforce or not have kids, which is even worse, because they just don't know how to make it all happen. And I tell you one thing, having families and nurturing families is a great feeling. But as I do, families are messy, families are fragile. You never know when a family runs into issues. So I think the woman also having the power of the purse and having economic freedom is very important. It's important for the family, but more importantly, if a woman engages in paid work, it's great for the GDP of the country. Yeah. So I view this as a double benefit, and all that we're missing is paid leave and childcare.
That's the end of part 2. I hope you'll join us again on Monday for part 3 of my conversation with Indra Nooyi.